Hi, I'm Michael Killen, host of the Killen Report TV program. This show will provide insights into the emerging worldwide market opportunity for advanced technology needed to create clean energy. Clean energy does not increase the threat of what I call the greenhouse gas monster. My guests include Steve Hands, and he is an executive at an organization called Citizen Climate Lobby, and Alex Canara. He is a board member of the Silicon Valley Thorium Alliance, and Elise Donahue. She is both an artist and an entrepreneur, and Bob Green, who is also a member of the Silicon Valley Thorium Alliance. And my final guest is Ripu Malhotra. He is an SRI fellow. And I'm going to start with asking the question, and I think anyone who'd like to answer it is, would you define clean energy? Who would like to take a shot at that one?
Oh,
Not
okay.
you, Alex. All right, Alex.
You said anyone.
You're the man.
You're
Tell
always
us,
changing the rules,
what is
Michael.
clean energy?
That's a good question. It's certainly not many of the sources we currently have today for electrical power, for instance. And so if we want to look at what's clean, we have to look at, well, what's being emitted that we don't want into the environment. And that comes back to the fossil fuel business in particular. But it also comes back to other forms of energy that pollute because of their very manufacture and their very maintenance and their replacement and their lifetimes and so forth. So it may be very surprising to people to learn that wind and solar power are really quite polluting in their production.
Oh, they're clean, aren't they? Wind and solar.
Well,
aren't
that's
they
the
clean?
marketing. That's the marketing speak. But they're also subsidized to such a great deal that the marketing folks really love it. So
And
that's
additionally,
yeah.
additionally,
Bob can add to that.
Because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, they always have to run backup gas-fired power plants,
Right.
okay, which generate CO2. So I would expand Alex's definition to say that it should be carbon-free sources of energy. And there aren't that many of them that we can rely on.
Okay, can I just paraphrase? Then renewable energy is one thing. Clean energy can be a second thing. And renewable
Right.
energy like sun and turbines, wind, have to have backup solutions. And right now, there's no good storage for.
And even if we had storage,
Right.
you would have to have at least 3 times as much wind and solar as people project. So the cost factors, everything you hear about costs are not accurate at all.
Yeah.
So, am I safe to say clean energy is primarily nuclear?
Well, you can argue that hydro is. However, hydro is also dangerous
Okay.
in the terms of dam construction and so forth to the environment and to the people living below the dam, as
Okay.
we learned with Oroville just this last year in California. So there's very limited sources of clean energy, truly clean energy.
Geothermal can be,
Right.
but again, you can only do that in certain places.
Okay.
I guess, look, if I could jump in,
Sure,
you
Steve.
know, my view is that there's a whole range of cleanness when it comes to energy. And I am fearful of describing clean energy as being perfectly clean in all regards. To me, you then start having the good, you have the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Right.
And we need to transition to more, to cleaner energy from where we're getting energy right now. And I think the common understanding of clean energy does include solar and wind and hydro as well as nuclear. I think there's a whole spectrum and menu of clean energy that will come into play over time, and as technology makes them all cleaner over time.
All right, thank you. Bob.
I partially agree with that, but I also disagree in the fact that we're assuming that we have time to make these transitions. And ocean acidification is going at a rapid rate, and we are in danger of poisoning our oceans. And it's all due to CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And so we have to address that, and the way we have to address that is to get as much CO2 production offline as we can. So the conservation effort's a really good effort, and even the carbon tax is a good effort, but it doesn't go far enough, fast enough. That's my concern. We have to get to cleaner sources more quickly.
Okay, so everybody is not you here, but everybody else in the press, the environmentalists, they're talking about the impact of increased carbon emissions creating climate change.
Yes.
And do they include the ocean, the content of the
Not
ocean?
often. Not often.
Not
It
often.
took several years before the IPCC actually included a couple of chapters on it.
Okay.
And that's the problem. The problem is education. I mean, FDR said education is the key to democracy. That's our
Okay.
problem.
So I just want to say, Bob, on the IPCC folks,
Right.
do they include the threat of ocean acidification?
Only as a side note. They
Only as
didn't.
a side-
Oh, they didn't
Right.
address it directly. What they addressed directly was trying to keep global temperatures down to +2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels by 2100.
Right.
Well, the problem is we're in danger of polluting our oceans by 2050.
Right.
Are we really going to care what the temperature is in 2100 if we've screwed up the oceans by 2050? I ask you that.
Okay, I get the point, and I was wondering, Rapu,
Yes.
did you want to say anything about?
Steve, I liked your point. Actually, I think we have to look at it as the whole spectrum, and I think it's good to give some numbers out, actually. So, for example, for every kilowatt hour of dirty coal, if I use one of the dirtiest processes, I'll be emitting about a kilogram of 2 pounds of CO2. For the same kilowatt hour from wind and solar, maybe on life cycle basis, it's about 14 pounds or something. It's much less. And then if I go to nuclear, it's even less, 0.5 or something like that. It's so you have to give those numbers, whether it's 1,000, 40, 2, 3, 1, but there's a whole range. Natural gas is about 400 in the middle.
Well, I
So
think
it's not all bad, it's not all good. But there are these gradations.
Right.
And I think you also have to look at what are the other toxins or poisons
Right.
that are coming out and that affect us.
There's a whole area in China that is so polluted with the products of rare earth mining to serve particularly windmill production that you look at this vast valley that used to be farmland and it's all covered with poisonous, even radioactive material. And the problem is that people have not had the media explain to them the realities of each of these. They've been caught, as I mentioned earlier, like the CNN show just before I got here, they've been caught in this belief that somehow if there's a way of getting a little bit of energy like from the sun or a little bit of energy from the wind, well, that's good. But it's not, because you've invested a certain amount of materials, resources, certain amount of materials, and it turns out that when you look at it, the whole playing field is not at all level with regard to pollution, whether from emissions or from just the manufacture and operation of systems that you might think were clean. So the problem is education. The problem is getting people to understand there's no such thing as renewable energy, if they remember their high school science class, and things that people claim who are selling products are not necessarily true, just like soap, right?
Okay, very good. I think all of you know I tend to think about greenhouse gases as a monster, okay? And I tend to feel it's getting bigger and bigger and more threatening. And I listen to all of you, the scientists, and many, many others, and most of them say they don't know if we've already reached a tipping point where things are baked into the system and we are heading for great disasters. The scientists don't know, but they know this thing is big and threatening, and they don't, they look at the political situation in Washington, and they are not comfortable that this nation will, get around to really dealing with this monster. And now I'd like to ask Rapu. Rapu, how big is this monster, and how would you put it into perspective to help us get a feel for this threat?
So, as your painting shows over there, I don't know if the camera is going to the paintings, the CO2 that's in the air already, we are talking about the greenhouse gas, just the CO2 that's in the air already, is 3,200 billion tons. That's 3.2 trillion, but I'm using billion because everything else we'll be talking in billions of tons. So remember, it's 3,200 billion tons of CO2 that's there. Each year, through the use of energy, through fossil energy in particular, natural gas, oil, and coal, the world releases about 35 billion tons. So it's about 1% or so of what's there. Now, not all of it goes to feed that monster in the air. About half of it goes to feed. The other half goes to either the oceans or back onto the land as in trees or some other ways into the soil. But you're adding a fair amount of it each year. If we look at the budget that scientists have been telling us, we don't have that much to be feeding it at the rate of about 17 to 20 billion tons a year for very many years before we go beyond the point at which the temperature, the global warming would increase the 2 degrees C. So that's the real challenge. And as Bob was talking about half of it, if we were previously thinking, oh, we are safe because we are not putting all of it into the air. Well, what's not going into the air and it's going into the ocean is having also very harmful effects.
Okay, are you comfortable we're moving fast enough to stop feeding this monster?
The challenge that I have to remember always is, why are we feeding it? We are doing that because we want to raise the standard of living everywhere also.
Yeah.
That's the other part. I'm not comfortable knowing that lack of energy is causing to the tune of 17,000 children under the age of 5 dying every day. Energy poverty is a huge problem. And if my other systems are not gearing up fast enough, then I have to allow the use of fossil energy or something so that people can lead healthy, productive lives. Now, there's a lot of politics involved in this here also, because not everything gets distributed equitably. But the fact is we need to increase our total energy supply by a large amount.
There's people out there, they need the energy.
Absolutely.
This monster does not need any more carbon dioxide at all. And that leads to the creation of a multi-billion, trillion-dollar market for creating clean energy technology. Agreed?
Right.
Agreed.
I would like to ask Steve, your organization has had a laser focus on, I believe, members of the House of Representatives, trying to lobby, convince them to enact legislation that would help, in effect, put a tax on or a dividend or whatever on carbon. What's the status of that activity?
Well, let me start just by saying what our proposal is, which is a carbon fee and dividend, which places a fee on carbon at the source, which means at the well or at the mine or at the port, and then all of the money, and it's a steadily rising fee, so that over a fairly short period of time that it significantly changes the economic attractiveness of clean energy versus the fossil fuel industry. And then all the money that's collected goes back to American households in monthly dividend checks. And then there's a border adjustment to make sure we're keeping American businesses on an even playing field with countries that don't have that. So that's the basic proposal. So we've been lobbying, we've been educating the public and lobbying Congress for many years. And there is definitely many strong indications that members of Congress are seriously considering this or something similar to this as good economic policy. And I'll give you one example of that. We were instrumental in putting together, in helping to create a caucus within the House of Representatives called the Climate Solutions Caucus. And that caucus is set up to be 50% Republicans and 50% Democrats. You know, it's bipartisan, which is very unusual in our state of politics right now. And that has grown, has doubled in size since the beginning of the year, and it's a caucus that's gaining more and more traction and more influence. And they're looking at introducing and passing effective climate action. And we hope that a carbon price legislation will emerge from that.
Two questions. How big is the caucus?
The caucus is 40 members now. It's
40.
more than doubled, and we're hoping to see it grow, you know, up to 80, 100 more.
How many members of Congress are there?
There's 435 in the House.
So it's 10%
Yeah, right now, but it's growing quickly.
right now. And I'd like to go back to this dividend that gets distributed every month to households. Is it households? And then I want to share, when I spoke with George Schultz, who has a plan, which is, you know, I articulated
Yep.
it. He said everyone gets a dividend who has a Social Security number. How does that fit your model, or
Yes,
different,
it
or
does.
what?
Our model at this point is the dividend goes back to households, 1 share per each adult and half a share for each child up to 2 children in the house. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just now comment on my articulation of your fee dividend, right?
Fee and dividend,
It symbolically, it creates a wall between the fossil fuel suppliers and the monster, okay? And the dividend, the fee, makes it less competitive for the fossil fuel folks to sell their product. And as you know, some of the great oil companies and gas companies, they say this is a pretty good thing because it gives them, they can plan. You know, they know what's happening. Whether they really are behind that, I don't know. So that's why I created this yellow wall. And I just wonder now, since you folks are very close to the Congress, now you've heard Donald Trump has said he's pulling us out of the Paris Accord, and he's really sent a signal to Congress that it's not wise to increase the cost of coal, and that's what the use of coal and some other fossil fuels. And do you think that signal is going to make it more difficult for you to increase your caucus and make progress?
You know, I think personally that this train has left the station. I think there's no turning back for the world to move to migrate to a clean energy economy. Some things like President Trump pulling us out may have some slight impact on, you know, at the edges. But, you know, coal, for example, is losing market share not just because of the pollution aspect, because it's becoming less and less economically attractive. It's, you know, the 5 top coal companies in the United States have lost 99% of their market value in the last 5 years. And it's because clean energy is becoming economically desirable, and companies that use energy are moving faster and faster to 100% clean renewables because it makes sense. It cuts their costs, it stabilizes their source of energy. So I think we're moving in that direction regardless of what happened, what President Trump has said.
Mind if I make a statement about that, though? So the reason that coal is down is actually because gas is up, not because
Clean energy.
wind or solar or anything else are going in. And that's well known. The other thing is that I just thought of this when we were talking about the fee and dividend. Is the fee going to be charged to those who leak greenhouse gases? California is notorious for leaking methane. We leak more methane in California, legally, because of our regulations, our rather lax regulations, then all the GHG reduction created by all the wind and solar ever constructed in California.
Okay.
Every year we wipe out the benefits of all the wind and solar ever built in California by a factor of more than 2. The Aliso Canyon gas leak, which was due to ineptitude at the CPUC and Southern California Gas, wiped out all of California's wind and solar benefits in 4 months.
Okay.
So does the fee actually look into this kind of very serious leakage, which is much worse than actually CO2?
You have
That's
a
my
quick
point.
Answer that? Quick
Yeah,
answer.
yeah.
It does cover all
I'm
greenhouse
curious.
gases, and it's up to the regulatory bodies to measure
So the
that,
regulators will have to
Have to
actually
measure it, absolutely.
measure it.
So both of you
Good.
made me think of something that I'd like to ask Bob. I think we all agree there is a huge emerging opportunity for advanced technology. And by advanced technology, and again, I'm referring to things I picked up from George Shultz. And one of those types of advanced technology, as you know, is the next generation of nuclear power plants that are small, modular, and are designed in such a way that they are safer than ever we could imagine. So, Bob, I want to ask you, how would this new marketplace or this new high-tech energy industry develop or
Well,
how do you-
it's a tremendous opportunity if we want to take advantage of it, because nuclear power is safe, and particularly with these small modular and also molten salt reactors, you can actually employ assembly line techniques so that you can do the vast majority of the QC, in-house in the factory, and then lift those units, and they will go into their position and get installed there, which is much different than the current situation. And if you did that, if you made a significant investment, I figure that a nuclear industry for California could be equivalent to the aircraft industry in terms of size. And so we know that Boeing makes $150 billion a year and Airbus makes $70 billion a year. Well, with Boeing, some of that's military and missiles, so maybe half of that is in aircraft and services. So let's say 75 billion there. Let's take half of Airbus's, which is about 50 billion, 25. So about $100 billion industry is possible. Now, what would you do with it if you were making those sorts of investments? If we had a national program to seed the world with these types of reactors, you could help the countries that still want to meet the Paris Accords. A lot of them don't know how to meet the Paris Accords, okay? But you could provide them a solution where they could get their greenhouse gases down to virtually nil. And because there is empirical evidence that energy-rich countries have fewer babies per woman, and that the impoverished companies have the opposite, that if you get energy into the hands of those societies, then they can really have an effect on population too.
That's excellent. And we are running down in time. We're not quite there, but we have an artist, an entrepreneur here. And, these men are scientists for the most part, and they appeal to people's need for logic.
Right.
But that's only one aspect of what is of value to us human beings. It's also the emotions, and art plays a role. And I was just wondering, yes, of course, I made this painting, but you're an artist. What do you see here in terms of artistic principles or?
You know, I see clearly a sampling of really what is happening. You know, you have the coal industry or the oil industry down here, and people they're seemingly content, or they're making a living. They are satisfied, so to speak, with what's going on. They're able to pay their mortgage or whatever. But if you look at your, I call it habitats of thought or habitats of action, what's going on, and then you zoom out and you see really the consequences of this, that, and the other, that it could very much be catastrophic, which what you were saying about education, and that's somewhat of a wild animal right now. Wouldn't you think that any time you turn on a channel, there's a bias involved?
All right, now, but I would like to know, you're an artist. What do you see, not the message, but the approach, the aesthetics, or what category would you put this painting in?
I'm very curious as to why you used yellow. That must mean something, because in another piece of artwork you have a yellow infinity sign. So I'm just curious, the wall, the movement, the flow.
Now you're cheating. I don't know. I don't know why I really don't know. And
it's kind of a...
He's an artist.
but, all right.
Artists don't have
Other
to explain
thoughts?
themselves.
Well, the yellow aside, it's very powerful, your use of color. It's kind of gloomy and dark and hovering.
Yellow?
No, all the other. You know,
all right.
you've got the carbon character up there who's very threatening.
Okay, so I don't have an answer for you, but
You don't have to
I
have
greatly.
one.
And just briefly, you're an artist. What category of art that you make? You're classical?
Classical, yeah, representational.
Okay, so we are out of time, and I want to say, Elise, thank you very much. Alex, you were wonderful. Steve, also, you were very informative. And Bob, of course, you're always good. And Rapu, you were quiet today, but I want to acknowledge something. You annotate, you are kind to annotate with numbers my paintings. Some artists would be horrified that somebody comes along and writes on their painting, but I am honored. And,
You let me vandalize your painting.
I think-
You let me vandalize your paintings with my numbers.
All right. So I'm winding up, and I want to share one of the next TV shows I'm going to make will be with a PBS correspondent, Spencer Michaels, and what we're going to do in that particular show is going to ask him a series of questions of how he went about making news pieces for PBS. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm Michael Killen.